Jake Sullivan stood at the observation deck of the USS Endeavour watching the strange ships approach Earth. The vessels looked like they were made of pure crystal and light. They moved without any visible engines or thrust. Jake had been chosen to lead the human delegation because he had handled difficult negotiations before, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Dr. Amy Rodriguez worked at her translation computers nearby, trying to decode the signals coming from the alien ships. She was the best linguist on Earth and had learned 17 human languages, but these sounds were completely different. The aliens used musical tones that seemed to carry meaning in ways her equipment could barely detect. Colonel Peter Barnes checked his weapons for the third time, even though everyone knew they would be useless against technology this advanced. He was there to protect the delegation, but also to study how these aliens fought in case things went wrong. Peter had fought in 3 wars and could read danger in any situation, but these aliens felt different somehow. The lead alien ship sent a message that Amy's computers finally translated. They wanted to meet on the human vessel. Jake agreed because refusing seemed like a bad way to start. Within an hour, a small crystal ship docked with the Endeavour, and the first aliens stepped aboard. The creatures were tall and thin with skin like glass that showed light moving underneath. They had 4 arms instead of 2 and moved in ways that seemed to flow like water. Their leader introduced himself through harmonic sounds that Amy's equipment translated as High Curator Vexathalan. Jake welcomed them to the ship and offered them food and drink, but they politely refused. Vexathalan spoke in musical tones that the translation system converted to words. He explained that they represented something called the Zalathi Consortium, which was part of a much larger organization called the Galactic Federation. The Federation controlled thousands of worlds across the galaxy. They had been watching Earth for many years and had decided that humans were ready for contact. This should have been good news, but something in the alien's tone made Jake nervous. Vexthalan explained that the Federation helped young species develop properly. Many races made mistakes when they first reached the stars. They fought wars or damaged their planets or made other errors that could hurt everyone. The Federation prevented these problems by providing guidance. Amy's translation equipment struggled with some concepts, but the meaning became clear. The Federation wanted to control how humanity developed. They would decide which technologies humans could use and which planets they could visit. They would teach humans the proper way to behave in galactic society. Jake asked what would happen if humanity refused this guidance. The other aliens made musical sounds that Amy's computer said meant amusement. Vexathalan explained that refusing was not really an option. Species that tried to develop without Federation guidance always caused problems. The Federation had methods to deal with such situations. Peter tensed beside Jake as the threat became obvious. These aliens were not offering friendship. They were demanding surrender disguised as help. Jake had dealt with bullies before in human politics, but never ones with technology that could cross interstellar space. Jake chose his words carefully. He thanked the Federation for their interest in humanity, but explained that humans preferred to make their own choices. They had always learned from their mistakes and grown stronger. They were willing to be friends with the Federation, but as equals, not as students. The aliens exchanged rapid musical communications that Amy's equipment could not translate fast enough. When they finished, Vexthalan looked at Jake with what might have been pity. He said that many young species made this same mistake. They confused independence with wisdom. The Federation had dealt with thousands of species over millions of years. They knew what worked and what did not. Humans were not special or different from any other young race. They would either accept guidance or face the consequences of their choices. Jake stood straighter and looked directly at the alien leader. He said that humanity appreciated the Federation's concern, but they would chart their own course among the stars. They were willing to talk and trade and share knowledge, but they would not accept anyone else making decisions for them. The musical sounds the aliens made now translated as something between laughter and sadness. Vexthalin said that humans had chosen poorly. The Federation would remember this conversation. They had tried to help, but humanity had refused. What happened next would be humanity's choice and responsibility. The aliens prepared to leave. Jake tried to keep talking, but Vexthalin was done with diplomacy. As they reached their ship, the alien leader sent one final message. The Federation was patient and wise. They would give humanity time to reconsider, but eventually all young species learned the same lesson. Some learned it easily, and others learned it the hard way. The crystal ships departed as silently as they had arrived. Jake watched them disappear into space while Amy and Peter stood beside him. None of them spoke for a long time. They all knew that humanity had just made either the best decision or the worst mistake in their history. Only time would tell which one it was. Captain Lisa Chen was returning from a routine exploration mission when everything went wrong. The USS Pathfinder had been mapping star systems beyond human space for 3 months. They were heading home when the ship suddenly dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the Kepler system. Chief Engineer Ryan O'Connor called from the engine room with panic in his voice. The quantum drives were reading impossible numbers. Something was interfering with the basic laws of physics that made faster-than-light travel possible. Ryan had worked on starship engines for 15 years, but had never seen anything like this. Lisa ordered the ship to try jumping again, but the drives would not engage. Whatever was affecting them was getting stronger. Dr. Helen Wright ran scans from the science station and found energy readings that made no sense. There was some kind of field surrounding them that seemed to be dampening their quantum systems. The crew tried everything they could think of, but nothing worked. Lisa finally ordered them to use conventional engines to get back to human space. It would take months instead of days, but they had no choice. As they traveled, something even more frightening became clear. Every human colony beyond Earth was surrounded by the same energy field. The barriers extended around each star system like invisible walls. Ships could travel between planets within each system, but could not jump to other systems. Humanity had been caged. Lisa sent messages to other human ships and colonies. The reports that came back were all the same. Every human settlement was trapped. The barriers had appeared suddenly, 6 months after the first contact with the Zalathi. No one had detected them forming. Ryan worked day and night trying to understand the energy fields. The barriers seemed to bend space and time in ways that human science said was impossible. They were not just blocking faster-than-light travel. They were making it so that faster-than-light travel could not exist within the affected areas. Helen studied the composition of the barriers and made a disturbing discovery. The energy signatures showed that the fields were designed to slowly contract over time. They were not just cages. They were cages that would get smaller and smaller until everything inside was crushed. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Maria Santos received a formal message from the Federation Council. The communication arrived through normal space radio, which took years to travel between stars. The aliens had sent it long before the barriers appeared. The message was polite and friendly. The Federation explained that they were sorry humanity had chosen to refuse guidance. They understood that young species needed time to think about their decisions. The Federation was patient and would give humanity space to develop wisdom. Barriers around human systems were temporary. They would be removed in 500 years once humanity had learned proper restraint. During this time, humans could continue to live and grow within their designated areas. The Federation would not interfere with human development as long as humans stayed within their boundaries. The message ended with a warning that chilled everyone who read it. Humans should not attempt to break through the containment fields. Other species had tried this, and their worlds were now empty except for small populations kept as living specimens. The Federation preserved examples of every species for scientific study. Amy Rodriguez worked with teams of linguists to analyze every word of the message. They found hidden meanings in the alien language that the first translation had missed. The Federation was not just threatening humanity. They were explaining what always happened to species that refused their guidance. The barriers were not new technology. The Federation had used them many times before. They would surround a defiant species and wait for them to either accept guidance or die trying to escape. Either way, the problem was solved. Jake Sullivan met with world leaders to discuss humanity's options. The barriers seemed impossible to break with current technology. Even if they could be broken, the Federation clearly had weapons powerful enough to destroy entire worlds. Humanity was trapped with no obvious way to escape. But humans had survived worse situations before. They had faced ice ages and plagues and world wars. They had always found ways to adapt and overcome. This would just be another challenge to face. Research teams across human space began studying the barriers. If the Federation could create them, then there had to be ways to understand them. Physics was physics even if aliens had learned to bend. The rules in ways humans had not discovered yet. Military leaders like Peter Barnes started planning for a long siege. If humanity was trapped for 500 years, they would use every day to become stronger. They would study alien technology and find its weaknesses. When the barriers finally came down, humanity would be ready. Scientists began working on projects that would take decades or centuries to complete. If they had 500 years, they would use them to become something the Federation had never encountered before. They would become the first species to break free from Federation control. The barriers continued to slowly tighten around human space. Calculations showed they would reach critical compression in about 120 years. The Federation had lied about the 500-year timeline. They were planning to crush humanity much sooner. This discovery changed everything. Humanity was not being given time to develop wisdom. They were being given time to build up their civilizations so the Federation could harvest more resources when they destroyed everything. The barriers were not a cage, they were a trap. Lisa Chen and her crew finally made it back to Earth after 4 months of conventional travel. Their report confirmed what everyone feared. The barriers were solid and complete. There was no way out using current human technology. But humans had always been good at finding ways to do impossible things. They had learned to fly when physics said they were too heavy. They had split atoms when science said they were too small. They had reached the stars when the distances seemed too great. The Federation had made one mistake. They had given humanity time to think and plan and prepare. They thought this would make humans accept defeat. Instead, it would give humans the chance to become something the galaxy had never seen before. Dr. Kevin Foster stared at the equations covering every wall of his laboratory. For 6 months, he had been trying to understand how the Federation barriers worked. The physics seemed impossible, but the barriers were definitely real. Something was bending the basic rules of space and time in ways human science could not explain. Dr. Nina Patel worked beside him running quantum calculations on the most powerful computers humanity had ever built. The barriers operated on principles that violated everything humans thought they knew about faster than light travel. They created localized distortions that made quantum jumps impossible within the affected areas. Dr. Carl Johnson analyzed the barrier energy signatures looking for any kind of pattern or weakness. The fields were incredibly complex and seemed to adapt to different types of interference. Every time human ships tried to break through, the barriers simply got stronger in response. Kevin realized that most species would consider these barriers completely impossible to overcome. The Federation had clearly perfected this technology over millions of years. They had trapped countless other species the same way, and none had ever escaped. But humans had always approached problems differently than other species might. Where others saw impossible barriers, humans saw puzzles that needed solving. They had never accepted that anything was truly impossible if they thought about it long enough. Captain Rob Miller volunteered to test the barriers with his stealth ship USS Ghost. The vessel was designed for reconnaissance missions and could operate for weeks without being detected. Rob wanted to map the barriers and look for any weaknesses the Federation might have missed. His crew included navigator Lilty Diana Torres and engineer Lilty Alex Thompson. They had worked together for years and trusted each other completely. They knew the mission was dangerous, but someone had to gather data about how the barriers actually functioned. The Ghost approached the barrier around the Alpha Centauri system slowly and carefully. Alex ran every scan the ship had while Diana plotted their exact position. The barrier looked like empty space, but their instruments showed massive energy readings. Rob ordered Alex to probe the barrier with low-power energy beams. The results were fascinating and terrifying. The barrier absorbed every type of energy they fired at it and seemed to learn from each test. It was not just a wall, it was an intelligent system that could adapt to threats. But Alex noticed something interesting in the energy patterns. The barrier was not perfectly stable. It had tiny fluctuations that lasted for incredibly brief moments. These gaps were far too small and fast for any normal ship to use, but they proved the barrier was not completely solid. Meanwhile, on Earth, Nina made a breakthrough that changed everything. She had been studying human brain activity while her test. Subjects tried to use quantum computer interfaces. Humans had a strange ability to influence quantum fields in ways that no other known species could replicate. The effect was very small, but it was definitely real. Human consciousness seemed to interact with quantum mechanics in ways that the Federation technology did not account for. Their barriers were designed to stop ships and energy, but they had never encountered anything like human neural activity. Kevin realized this might be the key to escaping the Federation trap. If humans could influence quantum fields with their minds, then they might be able to create small distortions in the barriers. The gaps would only last for nanoseconds, but that might be enough. On the colony world, New Texas Governor Bill Crawford organized civilian scientists to work on what they called the long game. If humanity was trapped for over a century, they would use every moment to become stronger and smarter. They would turn their prison into a training ground. The breakthrough came when Nina successfully interfaced human neural patterns with quantum field generators. The process was incredibly dangerous and required perfect timing, but it worked. A human mind could create tiny windows in the barriers that lasted just long enough for something very small to pass through. Rob and his crew tested the theory with microscopic probes. Alex modified the ship's sensors to detect the quantum fluctuations that Nina had discovered. Diana calculated the exact timing needed to slip through the gaps. It took hundreds of attempts, but finally one probe made it through the barrier. The probe transmitted data from outside the barrier before the Federation detected it and destroyed it. But those few seconds of information proved that escape was possible. The barriers could be breached if humans were willing to take enormous risks. Kevin worked with Nina and Carl to design ships that could use the neural interface technology. The vessels would have to be very small with room for only one person. The pilot would need to be connected directly to the quantum systems and time their passage perfectly. The ships were incredibly dangerous to operate. The neural interface could damage the pilot's brain if something went wrong. The timing had to be perfect, or the ship would be caught in the barrier collapse. But humans had always been willing to take risks that other species considered insane. The first successful barrier breach was achieved by Captain Steve Davis in a modified fighter craft. He connected his nervous system to the ship's quantum drives and waited for Nina to detect a fluctuation pattern. When the moment came, he thought his way through the barrier in less than a millisecond. Steve transmitted a single message from outside the barrier before Federation sensors found his ship and destroyed it. But that message proved that humans could escape their cage. The Federation technology was not perfect, and human creativity had found the cracks. Word of the breakthrough spread across human space through hidden communication networks. Volunteers stepped forward to become what they called runners. These brave pilots would carry messages and supplies through the barriers using the neural interface technology. The Federation had made a critical error in their assessment of humanity. They had assumed that humans would react to imprisonment the same way other species did. They expected despair and eventual surrender. Instead, they had given humanity a challenge that brought out their greatest strengths. Humans had always been explorers and risk-takers. They had crossed oceans in wooden boats and flown to the moon in metal capsules. Being trapped by alien barriers was just another impossible challenge to overcome. The barriers that were supposed to contain humanity were about to become the training ground for the most dangerous escape artists the galaxy had ever seen. The first runner to die was Jenny Walsh. She had volunteered for the program knowing the risks were enormous, but someone had to test whether multiple barrier breaches were possible. Jenny connected her nervous system to her modified fighter and slipped through 3 different barriers before the 4th one collapsed while she was inside it. Her final transmission reached Admiral Tony Rodriguez at the hidden base he had built in the asteroid belt. Jenny had successfully delivered intelligence about Federation monitoring stations beyond the barriers. Her sacrifice proved that the neural interface technology could work multiple times, but the risks increased with each jump. Tony had been Jake, Sullivan's security chief during the first contact with the Zelathi. After the barriers appeared, he had taken charge of organizing humanity's resistance efforts. His team included communications expert Dr. Laura Kim and strategic planner commander Greg Evans. The asteroid base was hidden inside a hollowed-out rock that looked like any other piece of space debris. It served as the command center for what became known as the Runner Network. Volunteers from across human space came to train for missions that few would survive. Dr. Laura Kim developed the communication systems that allowed runners to stay in contact with human space. The signals had to be incredibly brief and well hidden because Federation sensors were always watching. Laura created burst transmissions that looked like natural stellar phenomena. Commander Greg Evans studied Federation psychology using every piece of data the runners brought back. He discovered that the aliens genuinely believed they were helping younger species by controlling their development. The concept that any primitive race could outsmart Federation technology was literally impossible for them to imagine. This psychological blindness became humanity's greatest advantage. The Federation maintained only minimal surveillance because they were completely confident their barriers were unbreachable. They watched for large-scale attempts to break through, but ignored tiny ships that seemed to appear and disappear randomly. Captain Steve Davis became the leader of the runner training program after surviving his first barrier breach. He taught other pilots how to connect their minds to quantum systems and time their jumps through barrier fluctuations. The training was brutal, and many volunteers were injured or killed during practice runs. But humans kept volunteering because they understood what was at stake. If humanity remained trapped, the barriers would eventually crush every human colony. The runners were not just carrying messages, they were carrying hope that escape was possible. The breakthrough came when runner captain Angela Brooks made contact with aliens beyond the barriers. She had been searching dead star systems for places to establish hidden supply caches when her sensors detected artificial structures around a burned-out dwarf star. The aliens called themselves Threnodi, and they had been hiding in the dead system for over 300 years. They were refugees from another Federation correction that had destroyed their homeworld. When Angela made contact, they could barely believe that any species had found a way to breach Federation barriers. The Threnodi leader Zixkar explained that his people had tried everything to escape their barriers before their world was destroyed. They had built massive fleets and powerful weapons, but nothing had worked. The few survivors had been hiding ever since. Angela shared the human neural interface technology with the Threnodi, and they were amazed by how it worked. Their species did not have the same quantum consciousness effects that humans possessed. They had never thought to use biological neural patterns to influence quantum fields. In exchange, the Threnodi shared intelligence about Federation weaknesses they had discovered during their centuries of hiding. The Federation controlled thousands of worlds, but their technology was standardized across the entire network. If someone could find a way to attack the central systems, they might be able to affect barriers across the galaxy. The Threnodi also revealed the truth about Federation corrections. The aliens did not just destroy defiant species. They harvested their resources and knowledge before eliminating them. The Federation had grown powerful by stealing the achievements of every race they had conquered. Runner networks began establishing hidden bases in dead systems where refugees from other corrections had been hiding. Angela discovered that dozens of species had survived Federation attacks and were living in secret. None had ever found a way to fight back until humans showed them the neural interface technology. Tony Rodriguez coordinated supply missions that brought quantum computers and neural interface equipment to the refugee bases. Human technology was primitive compared to what the Federation used, but it worked in ways Federation systems could not detect or counter. The runner ships evolved to become more sophisticated as human engineers learned from each mission. The vessels were still tiny and incredibly dangerous, but they could now carry larger payloads and stay hidden for longer periods. Some runners began living permanently beyond the barriers. Dr. Kevin Foster worked with Threnodi scientists to understand how Federation barrier networks were connected. The energy fields around each star system were linked to central control stations that maintained the quantum distortions. If these stations could be overloaded, the entire network might collapse. But attacking the control stations would require more than just runner ships. It would need a coordinated assault by multiple species working together. The Federation had prevented this for millions of years by keeping conquered races isolated from each other. Humans had accidentally created the first alliance of Federation victims by developing technology that could breach the barriers. The neural interface systems gave refugee species their first hope of escape in centuries. More importantly, it gave them a way to communicate and coordinate resistance efforts. The Federation began to notice unusual activity in dead star systems, but they assumed it was just random stellar phenomena. Their instruments could detect the energy signatures of hidden bases, but their psychology prevented them from imagining that primitive species could survive in such harsh conditions. Runner. Captain Diana Torres established the most important refugee contact when she found a hidden base of creatures called the Vorlak. These aliens had been electrical engineers before their correction, and they understood Federation computer systems better than any other species. The Vorlak revealed that Federation networks had a critical vulnerability: the quantum computers that controlled the barriers used biological neural patterns from Federation citizens to maintain stability. If alien neural patterns could be introduced into the system, it might cause massive feedback cascades. This information changed everything for the human resistance. The neural interface technology that allowed humans to breach barriers could potentially be used to hack Federation computer networks. The same quantum consciousness effects that created barrier fluctuations could disrupt the alien control systems. Tony. Rodriguez began planning what would become known as Project Prometheus. If humans could coordinate simultaneous attacks on Federation control stations while introducing neural viruses into their networks, they might be able to bring down barriers across multiple star systems at once. The plan was incredibly dangerous and would require perfect timing between runner networks, refugee allies, and human colonies. But for the first time since the barriers appeared, humanity had a real chance to escape their cage and free every other species the Federation had trapped. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had been analyzing captured Federation communications for 2 years when she made the discovery that changed everything. Working in a hidden laboratory on Luna, she had been studying the energy patterns of the barriers around human space. The mathematical models finally revealed the horrible truth. The barriers were not designed to last 500 years. The energy decay patterns showed they would collapse catastrophically in exactly 127 years. The Federation had been lying from the beginning about giving humanity time to develop wisdom. Amy ran the calculations dozens of times, hoping she had made an error, but the results were always the same. The barriers were programmed to compress inward until they crushed everything inside them. The Federation had done this many times before to other species. She compared her findings with intelligence gathered by the runner networks, and the pattern became clear. Every Federation correction followed the same timeline. The aliens would trap a defiant species and wait for them to build up their civilizations. Then they would harvest all the resources and technology before destroying everything. The Federation kept a few survivors from each species as living specimens for their museums. These preserved populations were used to study the biology and culture of extinct races. It was the ultimate expression of Federation arrogance that they collected other species like trophies. Amy's discovery reached President Maria Santos just as the barriers began their first scheduled contraction. Long-range sensors showed the energy fields around human colonies getting measurably smaller. The compression was slow, but it was definitely happening. Santos authorized the immediate implementation of Project Prometheus. Humanity could not wait any longer to strike back at the Federation. If they delayed, the barriers would eventually crush every human world, regardless of what resistance efforts might accomplish. Dr. Kevin Foster worked with Threnody and Vorlak, scientists to finalize the quantum virus that would attack Federation computer networks. The virus used human neural patterns to overload alien control systems. It would spread through their quantum networks, causing cascade failures across multiple star systems. Captain Lisa Chen volunteered to lead the most dangerous part of the mission. She would infiltrate the Central Federation monitoring station and plant the virus directly into their primary computer core. The station was heavily defended, and the chances of survival were minimal. Lisa assembled a team of the best runners and refugee allies for the infiltration mission. Commander Zixkar of the Threnody provided intelligence about Federation security systems. Captain Angela Brooks would pilot the stealth ship that would get them close to the station. Dr. Carl Johnson completed the final version of the quantum virus just days before the mission launched. The program was designed to look like routine maintenance code until it activated. Then it would use human neural patterns to create feedback loops that would overload every barrier generator in the Federation network. Tony Rodriguez coordinated the timing for simultaneous attacks across hundreds of star systems. Runner networks and refugee bases would strike Federation monitoring stations at the exact moment Lisa's team planted the virus. The attacks had to be perfectly synchronized or the plan would fail. But as the mission preparations neared completion, long-range sensors detected something that terrified everyone. A massive Federation fleet was moving toward human space from the Galactic core. The ships were unlike anything humanity had seen before, and they carried enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. The fleet's trajectory would bring them to Earth in just 6 months. Intelligence from Threnody sources revealed that this was a cleansing fleet sent to harvest human resources before destroying the barriers. The Federation had decided that humanity had been given enough time to develop. Amy's analysis of the fleet composition showed vessels designed for strip mining entire planets and extracting all useful materials. There were also ships equipped with specimen collection systems for capturing surviving populations. The Federation planned to turn humanity into another extinct species in their museums. This revelation meant that Project Prometheus was no longer just about escaping the barriers. It had become a desperate race to destroy the Federation network before the cleansing fleet arrived. If the quantum virus failed to work, humanity would face extinction within months. Lisa's infiltration team made final preparations, knowing that the fate of every trapped species in the galaxy depended on their success. The runners had trained for years to breach individual barriers, but this mission required penetrating the most heavily defended station in Federation space. The Central Monitoring Station was located in a hidden star system that did not appear on any public charts. It was protected by automated defense platforms and patrolled by Federation warships. Getting close enough to plant the virus would require perfect coordination and incredible luck. Commander Greg Evans analyzed Federation patrol patterns and found a narrow window when the station would be briefly vulnerable. The timing coincided with a shift change in their security protocols that happened only once every few months. They would have less than 10 minutes to complete the infiltration. Dr. Nina Patel made final adjustments to the neural interface systems that would allow the infiltration team to hack Federation computers. The alien systems were designed to be operated by Federation biology, but human neural patterns could override their security if introduced correctly. The quantum virus was loaded into portable computers that could interface with any Federation system. Once activated, the virus would spread through their entire network within hours. Every barrier generator in the galaxy would receive the infected code and begin experiencing cascade failures. As the infiltration team prepared to depart refugee, allies across the galaxy made their own preparations for coordinated strikes. Species that had been hiding for centuries were about to emerge from dead star systems to attack their former captors. The Federation was about to face something they had never encountered before. For the first time in galactic history, multiple conquered species would fight back simultaneously. The Federation had always prevented this by keeping their victims isolated and hopeless. But humans had accidentally created the first alliance of Federation refugees by sharing their escape. Technology. Lisa Chen looked at her team as they boarded their stealth ship for the most important mission in human history. If they succeeded, every trapped species in the galaxy would be free. If they failed, humanity would join the long list of extinct civilizations in Federation museums. The deadliest species in the galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the prey fights back harder than the predator ever imagined possible. The Federation cleansing fleet arrived at the edge of human space expecting to find a broken and desperate species cowering within failing barriers. High Curator Vex Thalan commanded the massive armada from his flagship while his tactical computers calculated how long it would take to harvest human resources and capture specimens. Instead of despair, the Federation found something unprecedented in galactic history. Every barrier around human space suddenly collapsed at the same moment, releasing dozens of ships that should not have existed. Worse, the barrier network failures were spreading across the galaxy like a virus. Admiral Tony Rodriguez had positioned modified human vessels throughout Federation space during years of runner missions. When Dr. Carl Johnson's quantum virus activated, it did not just destroy the barriers around human territory. It brought down the entire Federation containment network across hundreds of star systems simultaneously. Species that had been trapped for centuries suddenly found themselves free for the first time in generations. The Threnodi emerged from there, hiding places leading an alliance of refugee races in coordinated strikes against Federation monitoring stations and supply depots. But the real surprise came when Vexithalan's tactical computers tried to predict human behavior and failed completely. The Federation had conquered thousands of species, and their psychology models could predict how any rational race would respond to superior force. Humans consistently made choices that violated every principle of logical behavior. Captain Lisa Chen's infiltration team had successfully planted the quantum virus in the Central Federation monitoring station. But instead of escaping immediately, they had stayed to upload something else into the Federation network. Within hours, every Federation world received a data package that changed everything. The transmission contained detailed evidence of what Federation corrections really involved. Complete records showed casualty figures and timelines for dozens of species that had been systematically exterminated. The proof came from the Federation's own files and was absolutely undeniable. The psychological impact on Federation society was devastating. Most Federation citizens had genuinely believed they were helping younger species develop wisdom and restraint. Learning that they had been unknowing participants in genocidal campaigns triggered widespread revolt within Federation space. Vexathalan found himself fighting not just humans and refugee allies, but half the Federation itself. Entire sectors declared independence when they learned the truth about correction protocols. Federation fleets turned on each other as moral outrage spread through their civilization. The military situation became impossible when human tactics proved completely unpredictable. Federation computers expected conquered species to either surrender quickly or fight to the death. Humans did neither. They would sacrifice strategic advantages to rescue enemy survivors and offer medical aid to Federation wounded. Admiral Jake Sullivan now commanded humanity's combined fleet from the bridge of the USS Liberation. His forces were vastly outnumbered, but they fought with a coordination that confused Federation tactical systems. Human ships would ram Federation vessels to save refugee allies or deliberately expose themselves to draw fire away from weaker species. The Federation had spent millions of years perfecting ways to contain and control other species, but they had never encountered opponents who fought for principles rather than survival. Humans made decisions based on concepts like justice and mercy that Federation psychology considered irrational weaknesses. Captain Angela Brooks led a mixed squadron of human and refugee ships in the decisive battle above Earth. Her forces included Threnody engineers, Vorlak technicians, and survivors from a dozen other corrections. They fought with a desperation born from centuries of oppression, finally finding an outlet. The turning point came when Vexathalan himself was captured after his flagship was disabled by a suicide attack from runner Captain Jenny Walsh, who had somehow survived her earlier mission. She rammed her tiny fighter into the Federation command ship's quantum core, causing massive system failures. Jake Sullivan made a decision that stunned both sides of the conflict. Instead of executing Vexathalan or demanding his surrender, Jake offered the Federation leader something no species had ever offered the Federation before. He offered mercy and the chance to rebuild Federation society along different principles. Vexathalan's response revealed the true horror of Federation conditioning. He literally could not understand the concept of mercy toward defeated enemies. Federation psychology was based on absolute superiority, and the idea that weaker species existed only to serve stronger ones. This moment was broadcast across both human and Federation space, becoming the symbol of why the Federation's approach to guiding other species had always been doomed to fail. They had created a civilization incapable of growth or change because they believed they were already perfect. The final collapse of Federation authority came when their own citizens began demanding trials for the officials who had organized the corrections. The evidence transmitted by human infiltration teams showed that millions of intelligent beings had been murdered for the crime of wanting independence. Human forces and their refugee allies established the Galactic Liberation Alliance, dedicated to freeing species still trapped in remaining Federation territories. But the real victory was not military. It was the transformation of galactic civilization from a system based on control and superiority to one based on cooperation and mutual respect. Dr. Amy Rodriguez worked with former Federation scientists to develop new forms of interspecies communication based on empathy rather than dominance. The neural interface technology that had allowed humans to escape their barriers became the foundation for true understanding between different species. The former Federation worlds split into dozens of independent governments. Some maintained the old hierarchical systems, but many adopted new approaches based on human concepts of equality and individual rights. The galaxy became more diverse and vibrant than it had been in millions of years. Vexathalan remained in human custody but was treated as a prisoner of war rather than a war criminal. Jake Sullivan believed that showing mercy to enemies was what separated civilization from barbarism. The Federation leader slowly began to understand concepts he had never encountered before. The barriers that had once trapped humanity became memorials to the species that had not survived Federation corrections. Each site was marked with monuments listing the names and achievements of extinct civilizations. The galaxy would remember what had been lost and work to ensure it never happened again. As Admiral Sullivan addressed the newly formed Galactic Council, his words were broadcast to every world in known space. He reminded everyone that humanity had been called the deadliest species alive, and the Federation had been right. Humans were deadly to tyranny, deadly to oppression, and deadly to the idea that any species had the right to determine another's fate. The deadliest species in the galaxy had turned out to be the one capable of genuine change and growth. They were deadly to systems based on fear and control because they offered something better. They offered hope that different species could work together as equals rather than masters and servants. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of Federation dominance was over, and the age of true galactic civilization was just beginning.